Hey everyone, I'm Jesse Lynn.
And I'm Angela Lynn. Welcome back to another episode of But Where Are You Really From?
This week, we're going to talk about certain financial issues that we've discussed with our partners before related to when there is financial inequality between partners. But it's really about like what are the expectations, kind of the tensions and the frustrations that each partner can encounter when there is financial mismatch or inequality in the relationship. At least for me, not even like actual things that are arguments or tensions, but just things that I feel about myself when we're making financial decisions or decisions that require money together.
Yes. So to set the stage on this, we are coming at this differently because one of us is more dependent on our partner financially, while the other is more of the provider role. And as for me, ever since I quit corporate life, I have been more on the dependent side of my partner. And yeah, it's been a struggle. And I would say, similar to you, it's not necessarily that there is an actual problem, it's that I have a problem. It's like a me problem. So, yeah, prior to this, I mean, I had always done corporate life and, I have my MBA. I got my MBA in as a financial investment in myself because it cost six figure to go get my MBA. And then I did that so that I could switch careers into a higher paying situation and put myself on a different path. So I was always used to being very independent. And I also lived in New York. That's where I grew into my independence because, it's hard to live in New York, especially if you just came out of school and you're making your own money for the first time. I mean, I was making $40,000 a year when I first came out and I still had student loans. And so I was very used to every dollar I make is mine that I made for myself and I pay for everything myself. So I was never used to having any sort of dependence on somebody. And even my husband now, when we were dating, I was still working in tech. So we split. Like sometimes, we'd take turns of who treated or whatever. It's not like I never accepted him treating me to dinner or whatever, but more or less we were equal. Like we split rent and all that stuff. So I found that I had a hard time myself once I quit corporate life and was pursuing this podcast full time and then also was just trying to figure out other ways to think about work and not the traditional sense. And my savings ran out at some point. That's just how money works. If you don't have a constant inflow, it eventually stops. So it was definitely a big identity crisis for myself where I was kind of who am I if I don't make my own money? Because I was so used to always providing for myself and not being in this kind of vulnerable state of needing to depend on somebody else.
That's kind of just how expectation falls around society, right? It's like how much can you produce? How much value are you like economically? So yeah, I could definitely see why that is really shaking to the core of somebody. I will speak on it a little bit from the other side. There are like a few things that always kind of like float up to me, which is that like I'm at where I'm at through a combination of skill and luck. I feel guilty sometimes talking about the money issue or feeling a certain way about the money issue when I have to pay more for certain things or when we are going on trips together. It's like I will pay for both of us and my partner will like slowly pay me back. And I feel guilty for being bothered about that because I'm like, well, I've been so lucky here. I feel like I should kind of pass it on. That the whole idea of like, what should you give back when you've climbed a ladder that was created by other people to support you? Like, should you then support other people? And so what ends up happening is I think I just end up paying for a lot of the stuff that we do together just without thinking about it as much. And that's normally fine, but there are like definitely moments where I have more issue with it than others.
I don't know. Let me know if you agree. But I think part of maybe why you're feeling sometimes a little bit of I don't know if I feel good about this is because at least in American culture, we are so used to splitting shit down to the hair. And I didn't realize that like it's a very American way to look at it until Ramon and I were talking about it. He was like, I hate Venmo culture. Like, no one does this in Spain. We're just like, especially if you're out with friends, you're just like, I got you tonight. Like, you get me some other time. You know, it's implicit that I'm not going to just like leave you hanging in the future. We take care of each other. So, yeah, I don't know if if you think that's part of it.
I will speak on that because, for better or worse, I feel like I will become one of those people who becomes destitute by not being a stickler for stuff like that. When I started making more money and I started going out with friends and stuff that I knew weren't making as much money, I would just be like, hey, don't worry about it. I got it. Like, I want to spend my money, like, having experiences with people that I love. And, like, I don't want them to see that time as, like, always requiring money. So my concern more on the money piece of it is like the idea of interdependence in a relationship. I get very icky when I think about having a relationship where there's too much dependence or too much reliance on like one dimension of the relationship. And the financial one is tricky because it's not like something that is really easily controlled. Like you can change, not so easily, but like you can change your reactions, you can change how you feel about something, but like the reality of the world in terms of how much you make, like it's not so easy to change overnight, right? So for me, it's more like I worry about becoming like the default payee, not because I cannot pay it, but I don't want to be seen that way, if that makes sense. And I don't want to be relied on in that way. Like I want my partner to still value that contribution as opposed to being like, oh, well, you know, you make more money, so you got it. And that's fine and it's true, but it doesn't feel so nice when it's kind of taken for granted rather than like considered as part of whatever we're trying to do.
You've heard me complain about how weird it is to be an American born Mandarin speaker because I grew up speaking Mandarin at home and have a passing native accent, but simultaneously sound like a child when trying to talk about real things. Since I realized no one out there was catering to people like us and decided, I'm just going to do it myself. I teamed up with my native Taiwanese Mandarin language teacher to create Real You Mandarin, a self-paced online Mandarin course built specifically for ABCs and ABTs. All of our content is video-based, realistic dialogues centered on topics you'd actually want to talk about, from dating and pop culture to media representation and growing up as a minority in a majority society. You'll learn the relevant vocabulary in the context you actually use them and be able to practice them daily with pre-built digital flashcards. You'll also be able to practice speaking by shadowing, repeating back, or following along with all of these dialogues to practice speaking at natural speed with the right pronunciations. Check out the course at realumandarin.com and get 10% off using promo code WhereAreYouFrom10. Let us help you express the real you when you speak Mandarin. Hey listeners, wondering how you can support us? The biggest way is by increasing our visibility by following us on Instagram at WhereAreYouFromPod, on TikTok at But Where Are You Really From, subscribing to our YouTube channel under But Where Are You Really From Podcast, rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, and telling your friends. The more people we can get to listen to the show, the more we can continue spotlighting different perspectives and stories. And if you feel so inclined, we're also accepting donations at buymeacoffee.com/whereareyoufrom. Thanks, y'all. I 100% vibe with that because that's something that we've discussed in our relationship is I think it is easy to take for granted something that you experience all the time. So for me, being the one who is more dependent, yeah, it was easy to take that for granted. It's just like, okay, well, this is just how we do things now. Like you handle that portion. So much of it has to do with it's not about the money per se. It's about how it affects the relationship and how you guys see that contribution and how you value each other, even outside the concept of money. Again, me problems all the time. But like for me, I always, and we've talked about this on the show before too, it's like I always attributed my personal value as a human to like my career. So when I needed to depend on my partner, I was like, what else can I do? Right. So then I immediately put myself into the like, okay, well, I'll just do all the like sweat labor type stuff, right? So I was like, I'll do more like the housework stuff. I'll do like admin things like when we were traveling, right? I did like do all the flight bookings and like managing schedule things and like getting our house together for Japan. Like we did renovations and stuff, right? So like I handled all the like renovation oversight and all that stuff. And that was my like attempt at trying to bring value, quote unquote, right, into the relationship in exchange for the money. But we've gotten into a lot of fights about this stuff because at the end of the day, it's not necessarily about what you do. It's what you bring kind of like energetically to the relationship as well, what you're like investing from an emotion standpoint, from a gratitude standpoint for the relationship so that the other person feels valued as a person. Like we've talked about, even though he is the one who brings in more of the money or like most of the money at this point still, like if I'm still making him feel loved and valued and like that I have gratitude, especially towards these contributions that he makes, it doesn't need to be like you can put a number, like a dollar amount on my value as a person. That is already the value that he sees as like worth it for contributing the dollar amount, right? So it's fuzzy because relationships are not like, even though money is something you can calculate and like put down on paper, the squishy stuff of relationship, you cannot actually quantify that way. But there's something deeper about money. It's like it really cuts down to like what are your personal values around it and your relationship, this entity of the relationship, right? Like where does money fit in terms of the relationship's values? And are you able to separate when it's just about like the dollar amount or what that means for how it affects the relationship?
I've thought through and had some of experiences with that where it's like, oh, well, should the partner that brings in more money be less responsible for like housework or chores or stuff like that? And in my mind, that's always felt like kind of unfair. Like it's not somebody's fault per se that they don't make as much money as you do. Like if they've chosen to work in a particular profession that isn't that highly paid. But I think where it's tricky is that like every situation where that feeling around money comes up requires like specific navigation. So it can be really hard to put in place, like, at least for me, like any kind of like fixed model or framework to work through it. An example I can give for this is like when we go on vacation and stuff, like I don't mind paying for the stuff because I love going on vacation. I love treating John to doing things. But sometimes I'm like, I wish that he would be more proactive with what he's interested in doing. Because part of my enjoyment is like bringing him to do things that he likes to do. And so it can feel frustrating sometimes when I don't get as much like feedback from him on that piece because like then I feel like, oh, like I'm paying for the vacation and my partner doesn't seem very interested in like selecting any ideas or things to do, and it's free. Like they're not paying anything out of pocket. So that's where I think the little bit of the resentment does come in. But it's hard to navigate because it's always kind of like it's different each time. So for me, money almost becomes like another dimension of equality in a relationship. Just like if you were like one partner was more conventionally attractive than the other, or one partner grew up in different economic means or like different countries, like it becomes this extra layer that needs to be navigated with sensitivity in the relationship.
I think it is just another one of a gazillion possibilities of sources of resentment for a relationship, but it is one that society recognizes as important. What you really communicated is that you wish your partner would do some sort of behavior that would help you and also help you both have a more enjoyable time on vacation. But it's that you already kind of resent that piece not being done. And then because there's existing resentment about a behavioral situation, the money is like an additional stab in the stomach, right? Because you're like, and I also paid for everything. So it's like doubly bullshit. And we've had the same fight because of my own problems, right, around this value around money and like self-worth and whatever, right? I was like, oh, I think he like secretly resents me for having to pay for stuff for my life. And every time we've talked about it, he's like, I do not resent you for that. Like, I actually enjoy being able to provide for you. And like, it makes me happy to be able to provide for you. But when we have all these like other issues in the relationship, and then I don't feel like you even appreciate that I provide for you, it becomes this like additional sore subject. I kind of feel like it just really exacerbates existing issues with a relationship, like existing resentments that might exist, because it's something that society already values equally as important across everyone because you need money to function in society. So if then like you have these other issues already in the relationship related to like expectations and like lack of communication, blah, 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 that are not addressed, and there's an inequality in money, it just becomes this like slap in the face of like, oh, now I suddenly have like resentment around this, even though I don't actually like on a normal basis feel resentful about it.
Like when I think about the finance piece of it, I think a lot of the conversation has just been focused around like what I call like fun spending, which is like unserious in a way because it's just for fun. So I never get too upset about it because I'm like, why am I getting so mad about vacation? Like, like I shouldn't get mad about vacation. But then I think about like, and I don't have many like long-term financial goals, but it's also like if I were ever to have a long-term financial goal, let's say like I want to save $2 million to buy a fancy ass apartment, what would navigating that look like with a partner who doesn't make as much money? I don't know if you have had any conversations in that lens where it's like long-term financial planning and like if there's inequality in how much each person has a say in like what that should look like.
Yes and no. As far as our relationship goes, he's fine being the provider. I'm the one who's not fine, right? So I'm like, I want to make money. But no, I think he's always been like, again, if the relationship itself, like if I'm providing into the relationship from a love and like support and making him feel gratitude and all this stuff standpoint, he has no issue with being the one who provides. But for me, because feel I know I'm the one that has the triggers around all this shit. But like for example, we bought that Kyoto house, right? The Japan house. And at the time he paid it outright. And for me, I'm like, okay, I understand you paid for it outright. And like I did all the renovation stuff to be the sweat labor portion of it, but I still want to pay into it. So basically, like I've already told him like when I have the money, I want to pay you back for like half the house because it just makes me feel better. Like it's not he doesn't even want it, but I'm like I want to. I want to just know that I, paid into it. So no, not really from like a planning standpoint. It's just still a me problem standpoint.
I think that's great. I mean that shows that like at least from a financial goal setting and like what you guys want to go after together with your shared monies, like you do have a voice and you can steer it.
Well, heavy-ish topic. I mean,
Kind of fun though.
kind of fun,
Yeah.
yeah. Money is a sticky subject, so we want to turn it back to you, listeners. Do you have a situation in your relationship or your family where there is a difference in monetary who brings in what? Is there a difference in how much money one person brings in over the other? If so, how do you feel about that? Is that something that even bothers you in your relationship, or you have found a way to figure out different ways of looking at value aside from money? We'd love to hear your perspective about that. Let us know in the comments on social media or wherever you are currently watching this. And
As always, come back next week for another fresh new episode. And until then,
再见
再见
bitches.
bitches.